The rain had just stopped when the black Mercedes pulled up to the old music conservatory. The building stood there like it had for the past 100 years, all red brick and tall windows that caught the afternoon sun. The driver jumped out quickly, opening the back door with practiced ease. Out stepped Veronica Ashford, and everyone knew who she was. Not because she was famous like a movie star, but because her face appeared in the society pages every other week. Charity galas, hospital wings, art gallery openings. If there was a cause that needed money, Veronica was there with her checkbook and her perfect smile. She stood there for a moment, looking up at the building. Her designer heels clicked against the wet pavement as she adjusted her pearl necklace. Behind her, 3 more cars pulled up, and out poured her usual crowd, the kind of people who had their own foundations and summer houses in the Hamptons. At the main entrance, an old man, in a simple uniform, straightened his shoulders. Theodore had been the gatekeeper at the Hartley Music Conservatory for 30 years. His job was simple enough: open doors, check the guest list, help people find their way around. But he did it with the kind of dignity that made even the richest visitors treat him with respect. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Ashford," Theodore said, holding the heavy wooden door open. His voice was warm but tired, the kind of voice that had greeted thousands of people over the years. Veronica swept past him with barely a glance, her attention already on the grand lobby that opened up before them. The ceiling stretched up 3 stories, and right in the center sat the centerpiece, a stunning Steinway grand piano that gleamed under the crystal chandelier. "Oh my God, would you look at that thing?" Veronica said to her friend Patricia, who was wearing sunglasses even, though they were indoors. "It's gorgeous, probably costs more than most people's houses." Patricia laughed, that practice laugh that rich people do when they're not really amused but feel they should be. "Do you remember that time in the Hamptons when Charles bought that piano? Nobody could play it. It just sat there collecting dust for 5 years. At least it matched the curtains," someone else chimed in, and they all laughed. Theodore watched from his position by the door. He'd seen this piano welcome some of the world's greatest musicians. He'd seen children touch its keys for the first time and fall in love with music. But to these people, it was just another expensive decoration. The conservatory's event coordinator, a young woman named Jennifer, rushed over with her tablet clutched to her chest. "Mrs. Ashford, we're so honored you could make it to our fundraising gala. The silent auction will start in about an hour, and we have the most wonderful student performance planned." Veronica nodded absently, her eyes still on the piano. "It's all very lovely. Though I have to say, putting such an expensive instrument right in the lobby seems a bit showy, doesn't it?" Jennifer's smile faltered slightly. "Actually, that piano is used every day. Our students practice on it, and we hold informal concerts here in the lobby. Music should be accessible, not hidden away." "How progressive," Veronica said in a tone that suggested she thought it was anything but. She turned to her friends. "Can you imagine? I couldn't play a single note on that thing if my life depended on it. Remember boarding school, Patricia? That awful music teacher who told me I had the musical ability of a brick?" "Mrs. Henderson," Patricia exclaimed. "She was terrible, though she wasn't wrong about you, darling." Veronica laughed, loud and bright, the kind of laugh that was meant to show she was in on the joke, that she could make fun of herself. "If I could play a single note on that piano, just one proper note, I'd donate $10,000 to this place right now." Her friends erupted in laughter. Someone said something about hell freezing over first. Another joked about getting their phones ready to record the miracle. Theodore shifted slightly at his post. His weathered hands tightened around the brass door handle he was polishing. He looked at Veronica more carefully now, studying her face, the way she held herself, the nervous energy in her gestures despite all her confidence. As the group moved toward the reception area, Theodore heard Veronica say, "I mean, what's the point of music anyway? It's not like it feeds anyone or cures diseases. Pretty sounds for people with too much time on their hands." Her friend Richard, a man with silver hair and an expensive watch, nodded. "My kids took piano lessons for years. Complete waste of money. They can't play a thing now, because you pulled them out after 6 months," his wife muttered, but not quite loud enough for him to hear. Theodore finished polishing the door handle, and moved to straighten some programs on the entry table. He'd heard these conversations 1,000 times. Rich people who treated music like a status symbol, who thought of it as something you either had or you didn't, like blue eyes or good cheekbones. But something about Veronica bothered him. The way she'd looked at the piano. It wasn't dismissive, not really. It was something else. Something he'd seen before in people who were trying very hard not to want something. The lobby filled up as more guests arrived for the gala. Theodore greeted each one, memorizing faces and names the way he always did. The students who attended the conservatory started arriving too, dressed in their best clothes, carrying instrument cases, nervous and excited about performing for potential donors. A young boy, maybe 12, struggled through the door with a cello case almost as big as he was. Theodore helped him, and the boy smiled gratefully. "You nervous?" Theodore asked quietly. "Terrified," the boy admitted. "All these rich people. What if I mess up?" Theodore knelt down, his old knees protesting, and looked the boy in the eyes. "You know what? Half these people can't tell a C from a G. You play from your heart, and that's all that matters. Music isn't about impressing people. It's about telling the truth." The boy nodded and hurried off to join his classmates. Theodore stood slowly, noticing that Veronica had been watching the interaction. She quickly looked away, suddenly very interested in the abstract painting on the far wall. The afternoon wore on. Theodore helped lost guests find the bathroom, directed late arrivals to the coat check, and kept an eye on everything the way he always did. But he also kept watching. Veronica. She orbited around that piano like a planet around the sun, never getting too close, always pulling away. At one point, when her friends were distracted by the champagne table, he saw her walk up to the piano. She stood there just looking at Kurtum, her hand lifted slightly as if she might touch it, then dropped back to her side. Theodore recognized that look. It was the look of someone standing outside a door they'd locked long ago, wondering if the key still worked. He reached into his pocket and felt the old leather wallet there. Inside, among the worn dollar bills and faded receipts, was a photograph he'd kept for 40 years. He'd looked at it just this morning, actually, while having his coffee. Funny how life works sometimes. The gala was about to begin. People were moving toward the main hall where the performances would take place. Veronica rejoined her group, slipping back into her role as the charitable socialite who couldn't carry a tune in a bucket. But Theodore had recognized her the moment she walked in. How could he not? She had the same eyes as that 7-year-old girl who used to run up those very steps every Tuesday afternoon, so eager for her lesson she could barely contain herself. He wondered if she remembered him at all. Probably not. He'd just been the young man who taught piano to rich kids to make ends meet while studying composition at night. One of many teachers in what was probably a childhood full of lessons and tutors and activities. Still, he remembered her. Remembered the joy on her face when she finally mastered a difficult passage. Remembered the day her parents came to collect her, telling him his services were no longer needed, that Veronica needed to focus on more practical things. He remembered how she'd cried. The main hall buzzed with conversation and the clink of champagne glasses. Theodore had changed into his server's uniform. The conservatory needed all hands on deck for events like this, and the extra money helped with his rent. He moved through the crowd with a silver tray, invisible the way good servants learned to be, but his eyes kept finding Veronica. She held court near the auction tables, surrounded by her circle, but Theodore noticed how her gaze drifted during conversations. While her friend Patricia talked about their recent trip to Milan, Veronica's eyes followed a young girl carrying a violin case. When Richard started complaining about property taxes, she watched an old professor showing a student how to hold his trumpet properly. The conservatory's director, Mr. Harrison, stepped up to the microphone on the small stage. He was a thin man with wild gray hair who looked like he'd rather be conducting an orchestra than asking for money. The room gradually quieted down. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us tonight," he began, his voice carrying that mixture of pride and desperation that all nonprofit directors seem to have. Your support means everything to our students and our mission of making music education accessible to all young people, regardless of their economic background. Polite. Applause rippled through the crowd. Theodore refilled someone's glass while keeping his ears open. This year, Mr. Harrison continued, we've been able to provide full scholarships to 47 students from underserved communities. These young people would never have the chance to learn an instrument without your generosity. He paused, and Theodore saw him grip the podium a little tighter. However, I must be honest with you. We're facing a significant shortfall. To maintain our scholarship program through the next year, we need to raise an additional $10,000 tonight. Without it, we'll have to turn away at least 15 students who have already auditioned and been accepted. A murmur went through the crowd. $10,000. To most people in this room, it was nothing. A rounding error in their investment portfolios. To the kids waiting to hear if they got in, it was everything. Theodore watched Veronica's face. Something shifted in her expression when Harrison mentioned turning students away. Her fingers tightened around her champagne glass. But enough about money, Harrison said, forcing brightness into his voice. Tonight is about celebrating music. Our students have prepared some wonderful performances for you. The first performer was the boy with the cello Theodore had helped earlier. The kid's hands shook as he adjusted his music stand, but when he drew the bow across the strings, something magical happened. The nervousness melted away, and pure, rich sound filled the room. Theodore watched the audience as he worked. Most smiled politely, already thinking about the dinner reservations they had after this, but a very few, really listened, and Veronica was one of them. She stood perfectly still, her champagne glass forgotten in her hand, her eyes closed. The boy finished to warm applause. Other students followed. A girl on flute who played like she was telling secrets, a teenage boy whose fingers flew across, the piano keys playing jazz, a string quartet of kids who couldn't have been older than 14 but played with the precision of professionals. After the performances, as people mingled and bid on auction items, Theodore heard Patricia say, "Well, that was lovely, though I don't know why they need so much money. How expensive can a few music lessons be?" "You'd be surprised," Jennifer, the event coordinator, said, appearing beside them with her tablet. "Instruments, sheet music, maintaining practice rooms, paying qualified teachers, it adds up quickly, and many of our scholarship students can't even afford to rent an instrument," Richard scoffed. "In my day, if you wanted something, you worked for it. These kids today expect everything handed to them." "Most of our scholarship students do work," Jennifer said quietly. "Some of them work 2 jobs while going to school, just to help their families pay rent. Music lessons are a luxury they could never afford without help." An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. Veronica set down her empty glass on a nearby table. Theodore moved to collect it, and as he did, she said, "That piano in the lobby, do the students really use it?" "Every day," Jennifer replied. "It's first come, first served. Some kids get here at 6 in the morning just to get an hour of practice time on a real grand piano." 6 in the morning, Veronica repeated softly. "That's dedication." "That's desperation," Patricia laughed. "Honestly, Veronica, you're getting sentimental. Next, you'll be telling us you regret not learning an instrument." Veronica's laugh was too quick, too bright. "Oh, please. We've established I'm completely hopeless, remember? I said I'd donate $10,000 if I could play a single note on that piano." "You did say that," Richard exclaimed, perhaps a bit louder than necessary. The champagne had been flowing freely. "Ladies and gentlemen, Veronica Ashford has offered to donate $10,000 if she can play 1 note on the piano." The room turned to look. Theodore saw panic flash across Veronica's face before she covered it with her society smile. Now, she said. "That was just a joke. Everyone knows I'm completely tone deaf." "No backing out now," Patricia said, grabbing her arm. "Come on, it's for charity. Show us your hidden musical talents." The crowd started moving toward the lobby, carrying Veronica along like a tide. She protested, laughed, made self-deprecating jokes, but they wouldn't let her escape. Theodore followed, his tray forgotten. The lobby had been transformed by the evening light coming through the tall windows. The piano seemed to glow, waiting. The crowd formed a circle around it, everyone pulling out their phones to record what they were sure would be a hilarious failure. "This is ridiculous," Veronica said, but she was already being guided to the piano bench. "I don't even know where middle C is." "That's what makes it fun," someone shouted. Theodore positioned himself where he could see her face. Under the laughter and protests, he saw something else, fear, real fear, the kind that comes from standing at the edge of something you've been running from for a very long time. She sat down at the bench and the crowd cheered. Her hands hovered over the keys. Theodore saw them trembling. "Any note," Richard called. "Out. Just press any key. Easiest $10,000 the conservatory will ever make." Veronica looked at the keys. 88 of them, black and white, stretching out like a path she'd abandoned long ago. The room grew quieter, waiting. "I can't," she said suddenly, starting to stand up. "Come on," Patricia said, pushing her back down. "One note. For the children, Veronica. Think of those 15 kids who won't get scholarships." That was a low blow, and Theodore saw it hit home. Veronica's shoulders sagged. She looked at the keys again. "I need another drink first," she said weakly. "After," someone said. "Play your note, save the children, then we'll get you properly drunk." Everyone laughed. Theodore didn't. He watched Veronica's face and saw a woman drowning in front of a crowd that thought she was waving. She lifted her right hand. Her index finger extended toward the keys, shaking like a leaf. The room held its breath. Phones recorded. Someone whispered a bet about which key she'd hit. Her finger came down toward a key and stopped, hovering just above it. "I can't," she whispered, but in the quiet room, everyone heard it. "I'm sorry, I can't." "Stage fright?" Richard joked. "It's just one note, Veronica. Even a child could do it." That's when Theodore made his decision. He'd watched this woman circle around her past all evening, saw her fight with ghosts no one else could see. He'd kept his silence for 30 years, but some silences were meant to be broken. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his old leather wallet. His fingers found the photograph, worn soft from years of handling. He looked at it one more time. A little girl at this very piano, her face bright with joy, her small fingers positioned perfectly on the keys. He started walking toward the piano and people moved aside without really knowing why. There was something about the way he walked, purposeful, inevitable, like a man about to right an old wrong. "Mrs. Ashford," he said quietly, and something in his voice made the room go completely silent. Veronica looked up at him, and for the first time all evening, really saw him. Her eyes widened slightly, some recognition trying to surface from deep memory. Theodore stood beside the piano bench, his weathered hand holding the photograph. "There's something you should see," he said gently. "Something from a very long time ago." The crowd leaned in, sensing that something unexpected was about to happen. Veronica's eyes were fixed on the photograph in Theodore's hand and her face had gone very pale. "What is that?" Patricia asked, but no one answered her. Theodore looked at Veronica with infinite kindness. "Sometimes," he said, "we forget the things that once brought us the most joy. Sometimes we bury them so deep we convince ourselves they never existed at all." He held out the photograph. Veronica's hand shook as she reached for it. Veronica's fingers closed around the photograph, and the moment she saw it, everything stopped. The laughter, the jokes, the phones recording, it all faded into white noise. She was looking at a little girl sitting at this exact piano, this exact bench, her small hands positioned carefully on the keys. The girl's face was lit up with pure happiness, the kind that children have before the world teaches them to hide it. The girl was her. "I don't understand," Patricia said, leaning in to see. "Who is that child?" Veronica couldn't speak. She traced a finger over the photograph, over that little girl who looked so free, so unafraid. Memories started pushing through the walls she'd built, like water through cracks in a dam. "That photograph was taken 40 years ago," Theodore said, softly, his voice carrying in the silent room. December 15th to be exact. It was after our lesson and you'd just mastered your first real piece. For Elise. You were so proud. Veronica looked up at him, and now she saw it. Behind the wrinkles and the gray hair, behind 40 years of time, she saw the young man who used to sit beside her on this bench, patient and kind, never raising his voice even when she played the same wrong note over and over. Mr. Teddy, she whispered, using the name she'd called him as a child because Theodore was too hard to pronounce. A gasp went through the crowd. Patricia's mouth fell open. Richard lowered his phone, forgetting to record. You were my best student, Theodore continued, his eyes gentle. You had something special. Not just talent. Lots of children have talent. You had love. Real love. For the music. You used to tell me that playing piano made you feel like you could fly. Veronica's eyes filled with tears. She remembered now. She remembered running up those steps every Tuesday, her little backpack bouncing, so excited she could barely contain it. She remembered the smell of lemon oil on the piano keys, the way the afternoon sun would slant through these same windows, how Mr. Teddy would put gold star stickers on her sheet music when she did well. Wait, Jennifer said, stepping forward. You knew how to play piano? You were a student here? Veronica nodded, unable to trust her voice. But you said you couldn't play a single note, someone called out. You've been saying that for years. Theodore pulled out another photograph from his wallet. This one showed a recital. Little Veronica in a blue dress with white ribbons in her hair, bowing to an audience. She was 7 years old, he said. She'd been taking lessons for 2 years. She was about to move to advanced classes. He looked at Veronica. Do you remember what happened next? The dam broke. The memory crashed over her like a wave, so vivid she could almost hear her father's voice. Music is a waste of time, Victoria. You need to focus on real subjects, mathematics, languages, things that will matter in your future. My parents, she said, her voice hollow. They pulled me out. Theodore nodded. They came on a Wednesday. You weren't supposed to have a lesson that day. But they brought you anyway. You were crying so hard you could barely breathe. Your mother kept saying it was for your own good, that you'd thank them someday. I begged them, Veronica said, the words coming faster now. I promised. I'd do all my other homework first. I said I'd give up dessert, give up toys, give up anything else they wanted. Just not the piano, not my lessons with Mr. Teddy. The room was so quiet you could hear the traffic outside. Even Patricia, who always had something to say, stood in stunned silence. Your father took me aside, Theodore continued. He gave me 3 months' worth of lessons as severance, told me not to contact you again. Said they were doing what was best for their daughter's future. That music was fine for people who couldn't do better, but you were destined for greater things. Richard shifted uncomfortably. He'd said almost the same thing about his own children earlier. I watched you leave, Theodore said. You turned back at the door and waved at me. You mouthed the words, I'm sorry. You were 7 years old and you were apologizing to me because your parents were taking away the thing you loved most. Veronica was crying openly now. Not the pretty tears of someone performing sadness, but the messy, genuine tears of recovered grief. They never let me play again. We had a piano at home, but they locked it. Actually locked it with a key. Said, if they caught me trying to play, they'd donate it. So you learned to laugh about it instead, Theodore said gently. You turned your pain into a joke, made everyone believe you were tone deaf, had no rhythm, couldn't carry a tune. It was easier than admitting how much it hurt. Patricia reached for Veronica's hand. Why didn't you ever tell us? Because after a while, I started believing it. Myself, Veronica said. If you tell a lie long enough, it becomes your truth. I convinced myself I really couldn't play, that I'd never been able to, that it was just some childhood fantasy. She looked down at the photograph again. But look at her. Look at that little girl. She's so happy. She's so free. Theodore finished. You were free when you played. I've been working here for 30 years, taught hundreds of students, but I never forgot you. You know why? Veronica shook her head. Because on your last day, after your parents had taken you away, I found something you'd left behind. He pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. You'd hidden it inside the piano bench. He unfolded it carefully. It was a child's drawing in crayon. A picture of a piano with wings, flying through clouds. At the bottom, in shaky, 7-year-old handwriting were the words, "Music makes me fly. Love, Veronica." A sob escaped from Veronica's throat. She remembered drawing that. She remembered thinking that if she left it in the piano, maybe the music would remember her even if she couldn't come back. "Every time I cleaned this bench, I made sure that drawing stayed safe," Theodore said. "I kept thinking someday you'd come back. And here you are." The crowd had formed a tighter circle now, but it felt protective rather than demanding. Someone had stopped recording. This was too private, too real for social media. "But I can't play anymore," Veronica said. "It's been 40 years. I don't remember anything." Theodore smiled, the kind of smile that held 4 decades of patience. "Your mind might have forgotten, but your hands remember. Music isn't something you learn just with your brain. You learn it with your heart, your soul, your muscles. It becomes part of you." He sat down on the bench beside her just like he used to. "You said you'd donate $10,000 if you could play a single note, but you've been afraid to try, because what if you can? What if the music is still there, waiting? What would that mean about all these years of telling yourself it was gone?" Veronica looked at the keys. They didn't seem as foreign now. She could almost see her small hands on them, could almost hear Mr. Teddy's voice. "Curve your fingers like you're holding a small ball. That's it. Perfect." "The children," Mr. Harrison said quietly from the crowd. "Those 15 students who need scholarships. They're just like you were, kids who love music but might lose their chance to learn." Veronica thought about 7-year-old her, crying in the back of her parents' car, watching the conservatory disappear. She thought about 15 kids who might have to do the same thing, not because their parents forbade it, but because there wasn't enough money. "Mr. Teddy," she said, using that old name again. "Will you help me?" Theodore's eyes crinkled with warmth. "Let's start simple. Do you remember where Middle C is?" And suddenly she did. It was like a door opening in her mind. Middle C, the center of everything. The note that every lesson began with. Her hand moved without her telling it to, her thumb, finding that key with the small scratch on its surface, still there after all these years. "That's it," Theodore said softly. "Now just press down. Don't think about it, just let your hand remember." The room held its breath. Somewhere in the crowd, a student whispered, "Please," like a prayer. Veronica closed her eyes. She wasn't in a room full of wealthy strangers anymore. She was 7 years old and Mr. Teddy was beside her, and her whole life was ahead of her, and music made her fly. Her thumb pressed down. The note rang out clear and true, filling the lobby like light, filling a dark room. It wasn't just a sound. It was a declaration, a homecoming, a key turning in a lock that had been closed for 40 years. Veronica's eyes flew open. The note continued to resonate, bouncing off the high ceiling, wrapping around the pillars, touching everyone in the room. Such a simple thing, one key pressed by one finger, but in that moment it felt like the whole world had shifted. "I did it," she whispered. Then louder, with wonder, "I did it." The room erupted, not with the polite applause of charity galas, but with genuine surprised joy. Someone actually whooped. Jennifer had tears streaming down her face. Even Richard, who'd been so dismissive earlier, looked stunned. But Veronica wasn't done. She stared at her thumb on that key like she was seeing her own hand for the first time. Then, without Theodore saying anything, her other fingers found their positions. Her left hand came up to the keys. "Wait," Patricia said. "What are you doing?" Veronica didn't answer. She was somewhere else, somewhere 40 years ago, where a little girl in pigtails was learning her scales. Her fingers began to move. C, D, E, F, G. Simple notes, the kind any beginning student learns, but from her hands they sounded like a revelation. "Your hand position," Theodore said quietly. "Still perfect after all these years." She played the scale again, this time with both hands. The muscle memory was coming back, flooding back, like her fingers had been waiting all this time for permission to remember. She added a simple harmony with her left hand, and suddenly it wasn't just notes anymore. It was music. The crowd pressed closer, but nobody spoke. They watched this woman they thought they knew transform in front of them. The society lady, with the perfect parties and the calculated charm, was gone. In her place sat someone real, someone vulnerable, someone alive in a way they'd never seen before. "Do you remember Ode to Joy?" Theodore asked softly. Veronica's hand stilled. "That was the last piece you taught me. We'd just started it the week before they took you away," Theodore finished. "We only got through the first 8 measures." She positioned her hands again. The first note was hesitant, uncertain. The second came easier. By the third, her fingers knew where to go. The melody emerged slowly, like something precious being unwrapped. It was simple. Ode to Joy is one of the first real pieces most piano students learn, but from Veronica's hands it sounded like a prayer. She got through those 8 measures, the ones Theodore had taught her 4 decades ago, and then stopped. "That's all I know. That's where we ended." "No," Theodore said, sliding closer on the bench. "That's where we stopped. We never ended. Let me show you the rest." He placed his weathered hands over hers, gently guiding them to the next notes. His touch was exactly as she remembered. Patient, encouraging, never forcing. Together they played the next phrase, their 4 hands moving as one. "You see," he said, "your hands knew where to go. They were just waiting for permission." A 13-year-old boy in the crowd, one of the scholarship students, stepped forward. "Play it again," he said, "please. Play the whole thing." Veronica looked at him. He had that same hunger in his eyes that she'd had at 7, that desperate need for music that feels bigger than your whole body can hold. She started from the beginning, this time with more confidence. Theodore's hand stayed over hers for the part she didn't know, but increasingly, she found she didn't need his help. Her fingers were finding their own way, following the logic of the melody, understanding the patterns. Halfway through, something extraordinary happened. She started to improvise. Just little flourishes at first, an extra note here, a gentle trill there. Theodore pulled his hands back, letting her explore. The melody was still Ode to Joy, but it was becoming hers, filtered through 40 years of locked-away longing. "My God," someone whispered. "She really can play." But it was more than that. She wasn't just playing notes. She was telling a story. Every phrase carried the weight of those lost years. Every chord held the echo of that 7-year-old girl who'd been forced to walk away. The music was joy and sorrow and regret and hope all tangled together. When she reached the end, she didn't stop. Instead, she transitioned into something else. Something Theodore recognized with a start. It was a little melody she'd composed. Herself when she was 7, a simple thing she'd called the flying song because she said it made her feel like she had wings. "You remember that?" Theodore said, amazed. "I've been humming it for 40 years, Veronica replied, her fingers never stopping. "I just didn't know what it was. I thought it was something I'd heard on the radio." The melody was childlike in its simplicity, but she was playing it now with adult hands, adding depth and harmony that 7-year-old Veronica could never have managed. It was the same song but transformed, grown up, like meeting a childhood friend and recognizing them despite all the years between. Mr. Harrison stepped forward. "Mrs. Ashford, this is remarkable. You have genuine talent." "Had," Veronica corrected, but she was smiling through her tears. "I had talent. 40 years ago." "No," said the 13-year-old boy. "You have talent. Right now. Music doesn't go away just because you stop playing. It waits for you." Out of the mouths of babes, Theodore thought. The kid had said in one sentence what Theodore had been trying to find words for. Veronica looked at her hands on the keys. "All these years," she said. "All these years I've been telling myself I couldn't do this. I made it part of my identity. Veronica Ashford, the woman who can't carry a tune. I've said it at 100 parties, made it a running joke with my friends. We believed you, Patricia said quietly. We never questioned it. Because I believed it myself. Or I made myself believe it. It hurt too much to remember that I could play, that I loved it, that it was taken away. She played another scale, just to feel her fingers move. Do you know what my parents said when I asked about music lessons in high school? They said I'd thank them one day for not letting me waste my time on frivolous pursuits. Did you? Theodore asked. Thank them? I became exactly what they wanted. Married well, joined the right clubs, raised money for the right causes. I did everything properly, everything successfully. She laughed, but it was bitter. And I've been dead inside for 40 years. The lobby was silent except for the faint echo of the last notes she'd played. Then Richard, of all people, cleared his throat. My daughter, he said slowly. She's been asking for piano lessons. I told her it was a waste of time and money. He looked at Veronica, really looked at her. I'm going to call her tonight and tell her yes. My grandson, too, someone else said. He wants to learn violin. I've been discouraging it. Jennifer pulled out her tablet. Mrs. Ashford, about that donation you mentioned. $10,000, Veronica said immediately. I played my one note, as promised. But you played much more than... The deal was one note, but you're right, I did play more. Veronica stood up from the bench, her hand trailing along the piano's surface like she was saying goodbye to an old friend. Or maybe hello. I'll make it 50,000. Gasps echoed through the room. That would fund the scholarship program for the entire year. On one condition, Veronica added, turning to Theodore. I want lessons again, twice a week, with my original teacher, if he'll have me. Theodore's eyes were bright with unshed tears. It would be my honor, little sparrow. That's what he'd called her when she was 7 because she was always flitting around the room before lessons, too excited to sit still. I'm not so little anymore, Veronica said, but she was smiling. No, Theodore agreed, but you're still learning to fly. The crowd began to disperse, people talking excitedly, pulling out their phones to call their children or grandchildren about music lessons. The students who'd performed earlier surrounded Veronica, peppering her with questions about getting back to music after so much time. Patricia stayed beside her friend. Why didn't you ever tell me? We've known each other for 20 years. Veronica thought about it. Because I'd buried it so deep I almost forgot it was real. It was easier to be the person everyone expected than to admit I'd lost something precious. She looked at the piano. But it wasn't lost, it was just waiting. As the evening wound down, Theodore found himself standing beside Veronica at the piano once more. The lobby was quieter now, just a few people lingering. Tuesday at 4? He asked. Like old times? Tuesday at 4, she confirmed. Then impulsively she hugged him. Thank you for keeping that photograph. Thank you for remembering when I couldn't. Theodore hugged her back. This successful woman who was still somehow that 7-year-old girl who just wanted to make music. Some things, he said, are too important to forget. 6 months later, Tuesday afternoon at 4 o'clock, Veronica Ashford walked through the conservatory doors carrying something she hadn't owned in 40 years, her own sheet music folder. The same doors, the same steps, but everything felt different now. Theodore was waiting by the piano in the lobby. He'd been promoted 3 months ago to senior instructor for the scholarship program, finally earning enough to move out of his tiny apartment into a proper place. But more than that, he walked taller now, smiled more. Purpose had returned to his life just as music had returned to Veronica's. You're early, he said, pleased. I've been early every week for 6 months, Veronica replied, setting down her folder. Old habits, remember? She was different now, not just in the obvious ways, though those were noticeable too. She'd stopped wearing such formal clothes to lessons, choosing comfortable slacks and soft sweaters instead. Her hair wasn't always perfectly styled anymore, but the real change was in her eyes. They were alive in a way that made her look younger than she had in years. What are we working on today? She asked, settling onto the bench. Actually, Theodore said, I want to show you something first. He led her to the wall near the entrance where a new plaque had been installed. It read, "The Theodore Freeman Music Memory Fund, ensuring that no child's musical dreams are forgotten." Veronica gasped. When did this happen? Last week? The board voted unanimously. Your initial donation inspired others. We've raised over $300,000. We can now guarantee that no child will ever be turned away for financial reasons. Veronica touched the plaque gently. The Theodore Freeman Fund. It's perfect. It was Mr. Harrison's idea, Theodore said modestly. I just teach. You're the one who made it possible. No, Veronica said firmly. You kept the faith for 40 years. You remembered when everyone else forgot. That photograph, that drawing. You saved them. You saved me. They returned to the piano and Veronica began her warm-up exercises. 6 months of regular practice had brought back more than she'd thought possible. Not just the technical skills, though those had returned surprisingly quickly. It was the joy that amazed her, the pure, uncomplicated happiness of creating music. Patricia still can't believe it, she said, running through scales. She came to my house last week and found me practicing at 6 in the morning. She said I've lost my mind. What did you tell her? That I've found it. Finally found it. Theodore smiled and pointed to a piece of sheet music. Ready for something challenging, it was Chopin, one of the nocturnes. Far more advanced than anything 7-year-old Veronica could have attempted. But 47-year-old Veronica had been working toward this moment. She began to play and Theodore closed his eyes, listening. It wasn't perfect. She stumbled over a particularly difficult passage, had to slow down in places where the fingering got complex. But it was real. It was heartfelt. It was hers. Your parents, Theodore said when she finished. Have you told them? Veronica's hand stilled. My mother passed away 5 years ago. My father, she paused. He's in a memory care facility. Alzheimer's. He doesn't remember much anymore. I'm sorry. I visited him last month, she continued. I told him I was playing piano again. For just a moment he looked at me clearly and said, You were always happiest at that piano. Then the fog came back, and he asked who I was. Theodore placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. He knew. Somewhere inside, he knew. The door to the conservatory opened and a group of children tumbled in, the after-school scholarship students. They'd grown used to seeing Veronica at the piano now, and several waved at her. Mrs. V, called out the 13-year-old boy from the gala night. His name was Anthony, and he'd become something of a favorite of Veronica's. Are you playing the recital next week? Veronica's face went pale. The recital? The student showcase, Theodore explained. All my students participate, but you don't have to. All your students? Veronica interrupted. Well, yes, but you're a special case. No one expects. I'm a student, Veronica said firmly. I take lessons every Tuesday and Thursday. I practice every day. I'm a student. She turned to Anthony. Yes, I'm playing in the recital. Anthony grinned and ran off to tell his friends. Theodore looked concerned. Veronica, that's a lot of pressure. You've only been back for 6 months. The recital hall holds 300 people. Good, Veronica said. I want them all to see. I want everyone to know that it's never too late to reclaim what you've lost. The week of the recital arrived faster than expected. Veronica practiced constantly, driving Patricia to distraction. You're obsessed, her friend complained over lunch. You used to be fun. I used to be empty, Veronica corrected. I filled that emptiness with parties and charity galas and expensive clothes. Now I have something real. Patricia studied her friend. You are different. Richard and I were talking about it. You're lighter somehow, like you've put down something heavy you'd been carrying. 40 years of regret is pretty heavy, Veronica said. The night of the recital, the hall was packed. Word had gotten out about Veronica's story, the society lady who'd rediscovered her childhood talent, the gatekeeper who'd saved her memories, the fund that would help countless children. Local news stations had even sent cameras. Veronica stood backstage in a simple black dress, her hands shaking. The children performing seemed so calm, so confident. They hadn't spent 40 years building walls around their talents. Nervous? Theodore appeared beside her, terrified. What if I forget everything? What if my hands freeze? What if you fly? Theodore interrupted. Remember your drawing. Music makes me fly, you wrote. You were 7 years old, and you understood something most adults never learn. Music isn't about being perfect. It's about being free. They called her name. Veronica walked onto the stage, the lights bright in her eyes. The audience was a blur, but she could make out Patricia and Richard in the front row, Mr. Harrison, Jennifer, the scholarship students scattered throughout. She sat at the piano, a grand Steinway, even more beautiful than the one in the lobby. The hall fell silent. Before I play, she said, her voice carrying clearly, I want to say something. 40 years ago, I was told that music was a waste of time. I believed that lie for 4 decades. I turned myself into someone who jokes about being tone deaf, who laughs about having no rhythm, who built an entire identity around what I couldn't do instead of what I could. She paused, looking out at the audience. Some of you might be doing the same thing. Maybe not with music, but with something else you loved and lost. Maybe you were told you weren't good enough, or it wasn't practical, or it was too late to start again. Her eyes found Theodore in the wings. But it's never too late. The thing you love doesn't leave you. It waits. It waits for you to be brave enough to come back. She turned to the piano, positioned her hands, and began to play. Not the Chopin she'd practiced so hard, not any of the pieces Theodore had suggested. Instead, she played the Flying Song, that simple melody she'd composed at 7 but now fully realized, developed into something complex and beautiful. As she played, she told her story through the music, the joy of discovery, the pain of loss, the years of silence, and finally the return. The melody soared and dipped, sometimes barely a whisper, sometimes filling the entire hall. She added variations she'd never played before, improvisations that came from somewhere deep inside. When the last note faded, the silence lasted for 3 heartbeats. Then the audience erupted, not polite applause, but a standing ovation that shook the walls. Children were cheering, adults were crying. Theodore stood in the wings with tears streaming down his face. Veronica stood and bowed, then gestured to Theodore. My teacher, she called out, Theodore Freeman, who never forgot. Theodore walked onto the stage, and Veronica took his hand. They bowed together, the student who'd returned and the teacher who'd waited. Later, as the hall emptied and the excitement died down, Veronica and Theodore sat together at the piano in the quiet space. So, Theodore said, ready to start working on something more advanced? Veronica laughed. I'm 47 years old taking piano lessons like a schoolgirl. No, Theodore corrected. You're 47 years old, living your truth for the first time in 4 decades. She played a few notes just to hear them echo in the empty hall. You know what the strangest part is? I'm successful, wealthy, respected. I've raised millions for charity. But this, sitting here, playing piano, this is the proudest I've ever been. Because this is yours, Theodore said simply. Not what your parents wanted, not what society expected. Yours. The conservatory was closing. They walked together to the entrance, past the piano in the lobby where it all started again. A new sign had been posted beside it. This piano is for everyone. Music belongs to all who love it. Tuesday at 4? Theodore asked as he did every week. Tuesday at 4, Veronica confirmed. And Thursday, and maybe we could add Saturdays? Theodore laughed. Careful. At this rate, you'll be teaching here yourself soon. Veronica stopped walking. Could I? Teach, I mean? The scholarship kids? You're asking if you could help teach children who've been told music isn't for them, who might lose their chance without support? Yes. Theodore smiled. I can't think of anyone more qualified. As Veronica walked to her car, she felt something she hadn't experienced in 40 years. Complete. Not perfect, not finished, but complete. The broken piece of her 7-year-old self had finally been welcomed home. She thought about that little girl who'd hidden a drawing in a piano bench, hoping the music would remember her. The music had remembered. It had waited 4 decades, patient and faithful, for her to remember too. Sometimes the gatekeepers of our lives aren't the ones who close doors. Sometimes they're the ones who keep them open, waiting for us to find the courage to walk back through.